Welcome to the Nonprofit Lab, a podcast dedicated to the ongoing discovery of how we can all be a part of bigger social change through the lens of the nonprofit sector. I'm your host, Puya Porak. I'm an industrial engineer, a student of many philosophies, and CEO of Matchnice, a social impact tech startup with a mission to connect the nonprofit ecosystem and maximize social impact. And right now, we're working to launch a new kind of impact-centric fundraising platform that empowers nonprofits and donors to tie online donations directly to social impact. Join us on our startup journey as we look to uncover and shake up the status quo in the world of nonprofits. On today's episode, we're talking about what it looks like to start a nonprofit from the next generation's perspective, the next generation of nonprofit leaders, how nonprofits are very entrepreneurial by nature, scrappy, and really run like businesses, the effects of the pandemic on nonprofit programming, and what it takes to go from an idea to execution in the nonprofit world. I'm so excited to introduce you to our next guest, Tiffany Yau, the founder and CEO of Fulphil, a nonprofit that empowers youth to build a social entrepreneurial mindset to make an impact and excel in their future careers. As recognized in Forbes and her TED Talk, Fulphil has inspired over 3,000 youths to start their own companies, helping them get into college and even provide for their families. Tiffany is a dedicated social entrepreneur and community builder who cares about empowering individuals to realize their potential to make an impact on the world. She is a dual degree graduate of the University of Pennsylvania with a bachelor's and master's in sociology and nonprofit leadership, who started nationally scaled companies in edtech, education tech, and health tech. Yau has also co-founded Project Shields, an emergency COVID response initiative that has mass-produced over 150,000 face shields for frontline workers when they needed it the most. Yau also has a background in venture capital through her work with Red and Blue Ventures as a fellow of Venture for America, an organization founded by 2020 Democratic candidate Andrew Yang. Here's my conversation with Tiffany. Tiffany Yau, welcome to the Nonprofit Lab. It's so great to have you on the show.
Thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. I was just telling you, you're one of the first people I thought of when I was putting this podcast together because you were one of the first nonprofit leaders I actually had the opportunity to meet with when I was first thinking of the idea for Matchnice. I think it was like at a WeWork event, and I met someone who's like, "Oh, you need to talk to Tiffany." And then, do you remember we ended up getting coffee that one time?
I do. Wow, that was definitely pre-COVID.
Yeah, it was like years ago, I think.
That's
And
crazy.
if I remember it, like you were still at UPenn as a senior, getting ready to graduate.
Yeah, I think I was either a senior or I was doing my master's program. It was like the extra year, and I think I was definitely in the nonprofit space at that point. So maybe it was that master's period, and then they're like, "Oh, you gotta talk to this person in the
Yeah,
program."
that's right. That's right. And I just remember being kind of floored with inspiration when I met you because at the you're like in your early 20s, and I remember being like, like what are you doing? Like, how did you end up in this space? And I would love to like give the world an opportunity to hear your story with how you kind of came to this path of starting Fulfill, and like what inspired you to even start it.
Sure. I guess honestly, it's crazy. I never would have thought I would have gone into the nonprofit space at all, let alone just social impact as a whole. I think um, I definitely realized over time that I care about making a difference and didn't really know that that was the idea of social impact and like actually being able to label it as that. And I studied sociology in college, so I was a huge humanities person. And I think at that time, I was learning about so many of the big issues that, the world's facing, the planet's facing, humanity is facing. And, it's definitely very grounding to learn about, what's going on in the world, but I always wanted to do something about it. And what made most sense to me was when I learned about the concept of social entrepreneurship, which is basically essentially business for good. And I think that can really be, for profit or nonprofit business. And I think that was kind of how I got my introduction to it. It just made so much sense, especially in like a capitalist society as well too. Social entrepreneurship is just something that makes a lot of sense, but it's like you're doing well by doing good. And it's important to have that sustainability aspect of it, not just the planet sustainability side of it, but financial sustainability also. So I think one of the things that I remember we talked about too is just like I have a really strong view in terms of like how nonprofits specifically should be operating, in terms of having a sustainable business model, being able to diversify that into several different revenue streams, or at least having a business model like shamelessly being able to make money to be able to sustain the good that you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to dive into there, and I love that you're coming into the nonprofit sector with a fresh perspective, because to me, part of what is so inspiring about knowing you is that to me you represent the latest generation of leaders coming into the space. And so I was wondering, like, what has that been like coming into the nonprofit sector with fresh ideas and a different maybe perspective on how to run a nonprofit organization? You're thinking of it like a business model, and frankly, a lot of the nonprofit leaders I've talked to have said that you need to look at running a nonprofit like a business. But like, as someone in your shoes, like, what has that experience been like stepping into a sector that is large? There's not as many folks in your generation running nonprofits, at least to my awareness.
Sure. No, that's a really good question. I think there's a whole spectrum of views in terms of how to run nonprofits. I think at least from the program that I did at Penn, like I think even amongst the professors and the students too, I think there's definitely a whole wide range of views on how to effectively run a financially sustainable nonprofit. Some people were definitely all for the grants and event gala fundraisers and everything, and those are great, and it's great to showcase all that you're doing, but it's a lot of work. I think it's so important to also just be efficient too, and if you're able to like really hone in on a really good solid business model, and be able to devote more attention to more impact, without having to think too much about that fundraising piece in the long term, I think that's such a win. It's definitely a lot easier said than done. Um, I think too, for me, I mean, I never really had a traditional business background. I mean, I mentioned I had a huge humanities background, but I think I really do believe in entrepreneurship and just like what it's able to do in terms of just really creating value in society. I think entrepreneurship is really all about value creation. And I think, if we think about like nonprofit in terms of that entrepreneurial lens, it makes it a lot easier to digest the idea of having um, a sustainable business model that you can reliably go to. I feel like also this generation, I think I honestly define more as like a younger millennial. I'm right at the brink of it. But a lot of the Gen Zs and everything, and Gen Alphas, apparently that's what they're called after Gen Zs. So odd to think of, but like a lot of younger people, I think they're definitely more entrepreneurial minded. And I think even we see this through social media and everything. Everyone has this uh, problem solver mentality. Like no one wants to just sit around and just like watch things happen. They actually want to do things about it. And I think that's something that makes it even more exciting. I don't know exactly what the landscape is like in terms of the nonprofit space with the younger generation. I think it seems like, at least from my work, there's a lot of high school youth and there's a lot of high school youth out there that want to make a difference, but oftentimes don't know how to. That's kind of a lot of what my nonprofit tries to target. So we teach Fulfill, we teach high school students social entrepreneurship and how to build a social entrepreneurial mindset so they can make an impact in wherever they go in their future careers.
Wow. Yeah. And I want to dive a little deeper into exactly how Fulfill operates and how you're really creating impact at a scale. Like you're creating the landscape and these fertile grounds and opportunities for the youth of our country to really explore social entrepreneurship in a structured way and to then carry those ideas forward and make an impact on their own. But like you said, and it's not just high schoolers, it's adults, it's everyone. We can so easily be paralyzed by the issues that surround us and get caught up in like this thing is way bigger than me. Like, how am I supposed to make a dent into this? And um, as an entrepreneur yourself, I wanted to hear like from your experience, what was the process like from having the idea for Fulfill to actually executing it and becoming a 501c3 and getting to where you're at now? Like from idea to execution, what was that like for you?
For sure. I think honestly, it was very frankly a lot of going on to Google, going to YouTube, and looking all of this stuff up. There's so much that I think feels, I think there's such a high barrier for people to start nonprofits just because of the lingo that is used around the legal terms and everything. Like, what is a 501c3 nonprofit? Like, like what is a C for? What is a 3 for? There's actually like, I think there's many types of 501c's out there. And so 501c3s are the tax deductible types of nonprofits that are considered charitable. But I guess outside of that, it was really just looking up a lot of different things. And actually, on a side note, I don't know if this is something you want to put in. I can actually put this out. I actually wrote up an article too for like how to create a 501c3 that I want to put out there. So like I can put that out
100%.
and
Like,
like
I'm not going to edit any of that because that's great. And,
okay.
like part of this podcast is me learning and like understanding like the viewpoints of nonprofits for Match Nice and for us to kind of continue this human-centered design lens, but it's also for our audience to learn about the nonprofit sector along with us. And if you're saying that you've created these resources that explain some of the 101s, like amazing. Yeah, let's plug that. And, maybe we can include the link to it once we publish this.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
Well, idea to execution, I commend you on doing that. So I think in the introduction that I read, it said like over 3,000 youths have gone through the program. Like what does it look like to go through a program with Fulfill or a day with Fulfill?
Sure. So, I think over time, I think especially since you first met me too, we definitely pivoted our model and everything since we also care a lot about user-centered design and validating like those key assumptions and just like testing everything out. So, when we first met, we ended up hosting like uh, these summer programs to test out our curriculum to kind of really refine it before we wanted to put it out more at scale. So then we worked a lot in person with students, but now we are completely remote. We actually have a train the trainer formatted curriculum that's used across the country at this moment. So we, in our team, we don't necessarily have to be there in person. We create this turnkey content that teachers take and are guided through to be able to implement in their classrooms. And so, every curriculum is different. We actually have different courses that teachers use. So we have, of course, social entrepreneurship. I think that's definitely our key course that we love highlighting, because like at the end of the day, we want to build the social entrepreneurial mindset, being able to be impact driven, problem solver youth. That's the end goal for us. But we also have different pathways that complement that. That can be their own standalone courses. So we have some schools that have our sustainability courses, diversity, equity, and inclusion courses. We also have one in 21st century core skills. And also right now we're slowly rolling one out in financial literacy too. So, really excited to be able to put that out. And I think something that makes us super interesting and different from a lot of other, content creation types of um, platforms out there is we update our content every year, and it's actually the students who are the ones doing so. So we actually recruit successful former students who have finished the curriculum with the schools that we're in. Their teachers recommend them, and they end up interning with us over the summer. And this becomes like a whole research type of fellowship opportunity where students are kind of creating new case studies that they can um, implement in their curriculum. So, for instance, in digital marketing, let's say a case study in digital marketing, we have a case study about how the White House leveraged Olivia Rodrigo in summer of 2021 to be an advocate for getting the vaccine. So, like how was that technique leveraged and that in that way, less so than, something that happened many years ago, or maybe just a general idea that we're seeing in social media. But like we really like to keep things up to date and empowering students along that way.
Yeah, that's so refreshing to hear the kind of user-centered approach and how you've been able to evolve your model from just focusing on social entrepreneurship to all these other really pertinent and hot topics that are really at a strong intersection with what it means to be a social entrepreneur, like everything around DEI and everything you mentioned like is a core part of the thinking that's required to build at scale. And what I really love is how you've been able to involve the people you're serving, the high schoolers, the students, as part of the evolution and development of the programming. Was that always kind of part of the thinking when you first started Fulfill, or did you guys kind of organically come to that as the best approach for keeping your content and curriculum informed by those that you're serving?
Sure. Honestly, no, it wasn't. I do think, the value was always there. I think especially with nonprofits, you gotta stick to your core values and everything that you always promote. I think those are the things that always, no matter where you go, if your core values can justify your core values, mission, vision can justify any pivot that you make or new programs that you put together, whatever your model and fundraising model is, I think that's definitely the most important thing. So no, did not expect to go down that route at all. But I do think it wasn't always just about let's teach everyone to go be an entrepreneur. I think entrepreneurship is great. I'm a huge believer in all of the key takeaways and outcomes that come from it. But I don't think everyone should go be an entrepreneur. It's a lot. It really is a lot. But you can learn so much from it. And I think I've personally learned so much from entrepreneurship. And I think if anyone can go start their own thing, like you can literally do anything. I really think that. And if you can do that with an impact driven mindset, like you're literally creating the change makers of tomorrow. So I think that's really where Fulfill and like our own philosophy lies. But I think what you mentioned in terms of empowering the youth along the way, yeah, that definitely wasn't even initial thought of what we wanted it to be. I think we always wanted to find a way to make sure that our youth and their voices are heard throughout. And I think that's always actually a really big challenge of nonprofits and any type of philanthropic initiative, because oftentimes we're creating solutions for the beneficiaries that we might not even identify as. And how do you really stay true to user-centered design when you go about that? Like, it's close to impossible if you can't really get their voices to be heard at the table. So for us, I think looking back, I did learn a lot from the program that I went through. I think one of the things was like being able to have those voices at the table. So for us at Fulfill, I made sure that there's always one youth who has gone through our program who is actually on our board or is always part of that decision-making process. So I think it's important to have that sense of accountability. And I think this is not even just speaking from an opinion point of view, but it's actually very helpful to be able to have that structure of accountability, because especially when you're applying for grants, right? And you're literally asking people for money, they need to know that you're doing the work, the intentional work that's needed to make a real difference, a real meaningful difference for the people you're trying to benefit, and not just saying it. And definitely writing grants is a huge process, and anyone can write anything, but to be able to have like those checks and balances at every step along the way, I think that's something that makes nonprofit um, really awesome, in the sense that you can actually have that sense of accountability. It is also a big pain to be able to make sure that everything is so structured too, but it's definitely really important to make sure that everyone that you're trying to benefit is heard.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with more with everything that you just said. When I worked at Deloitte, I led a lot of the human centered design work for government, where we would talk to workers in health and human services and involve them in the design process and understand their challenges and their needs. And same with citizens. And we take all of that feedback and apply it and integrate it into the design of the systems that we ended up deploying. And like you said, it's not easy. It takes a lot of effort and it takes a lot of time, but the end product, and like you said, value creation being kind of the ultimate kind of goal of this, like the end product of taking the time and doing that, like absolutely pays dividends. Because I think there might be some kind of a old school philosophy around like we know what's best for our users or for the community, and this is what you get. And there's not a lot of that feedback channel involved. But one of the threads that I'm seeing from talking to successful nonprofit leaders is the constituent feedback is like baked in, and processes are put in place to make sure that you are hearing and you're not just listening to, but you're actually doing something about what you're hearing from the people that you're serving. And that's really amazing how you've been able to organically get to that point at Fulfill.
Thank you. No, I appreciate it. I think it really is just so important. And it's like, who can do user-centered design better than the users themselves? So uh, yeah.
Well, you mentioned earlier that programming evolved into becoming more remote in nature, and that you've created this more train the trainer model at Fulfill. Talk me through what it was like going through the pandemic as a nonprofit, and the impacts that had on your programming, the shifts that you had to make with fundraising, and how your team has adapted to this kind of post-pandemic state of the world.
Sure. Honestly, COVID was really hard on a lot of nonprofits and businesses in general. I think it was definitely a make it or break it situation. And I think, you know, it was such a a big eye opener, I think, especially in terms of how organizations should be rethinking about operating sustainably. I think I honestly feel like we were positioned very fortunately to enter COVID. I honestly am very grateful for many mentors to be able to give me whatever foresight needed before COVID happened without even acknowledging that the pandemic was going to happen. I think it's important to think about how you want to scale efficiently and effectively. And, you know, honestly, to be there in person, to do all the in person programming, it's really fulfilling, like, no pun intended, but it's also very exhausting too. It's a lot of time and energy that goes into it. And, at the end of the day, it is super meaningful, but I think it's important to think about that value creation aspect. Like, where are you positioned to be able to add the most value? These students have teachers that is like their sole job to be their teachers and be their person to be able to guide them in the ways that someone in person, that a teacher can. And so, like, for us, I think Fulfill's main value that we're able to add is, I mean, like, you mentioned, I'm pretty young too, and like our team, because of that, we're all like fairly young as well, and I think that also positions us well to be um, near to peer mentors for the students, to be close enough in age to be able to make relatable content that's engaging, and to be able to operate as this bridge between whatever academic content that they're receiving to a place that we're able to meet them where they are. And so I think that was where um, we realized we provide our most value, and we didn't actually have to be there in person to be able to provide that value. It's like if we're able to create this turnkey content and give it to someone who knows how to provide that value even better than we can, then why not? So that was kind of where my mind was at in terms of kind of being positioned before COVID. So we were actually already creating curriculum before COVID happened and the whole lockdown happened. Um, and I think, it was really fortunate because I think we made all the mistakes that we needed before COVID in terms of creating that virtual curriculum to be ready enough in time to be able to launch this virtual curriculum by that 2020 to 2021 academic year. So like luckily I think it really was very fortunate timing. I think we were definitely positioned well in terms of like that education sales cycle too. Education's a funky world. I think from end of the fall till end of the spring, there's a lot of communication with administration at schools and teachers and everything. But then once you get to the summer, it's like pure crickets. Because everyone's on vacation, the teachers are on vacation, administration's on vacation, and it's really hard to coordinate things there. But we were able to close on a few different schools and organizations right before the summer hit with this virtual curriculum. So I think we were just positioned really well for it in general. And it was enough to be able to get through the initial stages of COVID before we were able to bring on more schools. So honestly, just very grateful that we were in that position to do so. But I think the fact that we were able to show that we were able to do something even with COVID and make it look like we knew what we were doing, I think that definitely put us at a really good place to be able to grow more beyond that. I think especially the nonprofit space, in entrepreneurship, but I think nonprofit especially. So everyone's just figuring out what they're trying to do at the end of the day. I think nonprofits especially are more primed to want to pivot in almost any direction that they want. I think in entrepreneurship, there's this term I like to use called shiny object syndrome, where if it sounds good and you think you can bring in revenue, then go for it. But that's also not always what you want to do. I think I'm all about being efficient and effective, and but it's hard because you have to be so intentional at the end of the day.
Yeah, there's so much goodness there, and I love that you were able to, make the most, and like you said, it was a make or break for a lot of nonprofits. And I remember there was a stat when we were in like the first few months of the pandemic that was like 80% of nonprofits only have enough cash to make it through the next month. And events are out the door, those fundraisers, those big live in-person fundraisers are out the door. But it's those challenging moments that force people to really evaluate the existing ways that we're operating. And I'm so happy and I'm glad to hear that you all were in a position to make the most of that situation, and that it, in fact, accelerated your programming in a way to achieve more scale and to reach a greater audience and to engage more people. I think the nature of Fulfill and your mission and the programming and the work that you're doing is really well cut for that. But I like, it's hard for me to think about like some of the other nonprofits out there that are more of that in like reliant on filling like bowls of soup, or like sheltering folks and the challenges that they went to. So I want to acknowledge like some of the differences and like the potential challenges that nonprofits had. But I think the common thread is like what you're getting back to is like the values that you hold and how you were able to keep that at the center of the shifting changes. So even though like programming may have looked a little different, like the same mission is there, the same heart and passion behind the work is there. And I'm wondering, like, it seems like COVID really pulled the curtains back on like what's going to work and what's not, beyond like the transition of moving your programming to a more virtual first environment and thinking about how to scale that. What are some of the other like moles that popped up from COVID that you like really had to face and to look at head on and make some changes?
That's a really good question. Like there's so many, but I think um I think one of the things was realizing how much support and almost hand holding was needed for our teachers who are on the ground and actually doing the work, whether or not they're on the ground physically or, on the ground on the Zoom classroom grounds. But, you know, I think education, there's so much misalignment between, what technology is actually implemented versus what pedagogy they actually use and how they actually practice. And also how that pedagogy and tech is actually implemented in a way that logistically makes sense for teachers too. Like there's just so much misalignment there. So I think in the onset of COVID, just generally speaking about education solutions, a lot of teachers were given solutions that they had no idea how to use. And that's a big problem when you're entering an online space where maybe not everyone from your classroom actually even has access to a device that they can use. And it's so important to think really intentionally about the logistics of it. I think something we were not as well prepared for was how much we had to really guide our teachers with. I think we did a good job in general. I know we did a good job in general during COVID. I think all of our teachers mentioned that they felt really thoroughly supported, and like we're like a lot faster at responding to the teachers than a lot of other solutions that they were using. Like literally, even if it's just tech support, it's like something as simple as that, just to kind of guide them through it and guide their classrooms through it. Like we even had like an introduction session where someone on our team, whether it's me or someone else, would just like host a workshop and saying like, everyone, we're going to create our accounts for Fulphil today and show them how to actually put it together. Because it's crazy and mind-boggling to know how complicated of a process that can actually be if you factor in the tech challenges, the firewall challenges with the schools. There's just so many variables that, I never would have thought twice about. But I think also too, I think being a smaller, more agile type of organization, basically meaning we're young and growing and we have enough, but we're willing to do anything. I think that also positioned us really well above the more traditionally uh, bigger solutions and organizations out there, because we actually had more capacity to like operate like and be able to really create a high quality solution and experience for teachers where they weren't felt like they're left in the dark. So I think at the end of the day, like no matter what, I think it's so important to just be there for the teachers in that way and for your beneficiaries in general, as if you are a boutique solution and not just like this massive organization that has a million people working with you, but like somehow no capacity to help. So it's really it's really blunt, but it is how it is. But it is so important to really keep that in mind.
Yeah, I laughed and made you laugh because, I was talking about the different levels of magnification to impact on, I think, the last two episodes of this podcast. And it is interesting how, like, some of the largest organizations with the most resources can feel so distant from the folks actually that are supporting the cause and the mission. And, I think everything you just said is also just, again, underscoring that user-centered approach, human-centered approach to like recognizing the humanity behind the people you're serving and some of the real world challenges of just like adoption and like every individual is a little different, and being aware of that and to be there and to kind of provide the resources and the tools to support the folks that you're serving no matter where they are, and kind of meeting them where they're at. And I think it's definitely a best practice that I think applies to any organization, nonprofit or startup or not. And you also earlier you said like we did a good job like looking like we're knowing what we're doing, and just want to affirm that that is the case for everyone. Like I saw that when at a massive consulting company, it was like, oh, everyone's just kind of figuring it out. Like no one has the answers, but it's that exactly what you're teaching your community at Fulfill. It's the mindset of like facing these issues and knowing how to think through it, and taking that step one step after another, no matter how dire the situation is. So I applaud you on all of that. Maybe one more question around just like the pandemic shift and the effects that it had on Fulfill, relevant to Match Nice, and what me and my team are working on is with fundraising. Like, what are the shifts that you saw on the fundraising front? Things that were prioritized or deprioritized, and things that have really changed and stayed different for you guys since COVID.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's crazy because it's so different for every nonprofit out there. I think for us, we really focused on just honing in and doubling down on that uh, on selling to schools and large organizations. And I think that has been pretty helpful for us in general, because this is a prime time also for schools to be able to be open to new solutions. And I think that was definitely a big opportunity that we recognized, like if not now, when. Um, so at least we definitely prioritized at least getting our foot into the door. If they didn't want to choose us for this year, at least they know about us and we can come back later and figure something out. Um, I think for us, we never really had a big focus on getting traditional donations. I think personally, just never really had the network for that. I think, it's a lot to be able to pour into that fundraising process, especially if you're looking for major gifts and individual donations and crowdfunding. And Not that it's not worth it, but I think we really wanted to try to figure out a way that we can like rely on the market rather than a set group of handful of people. And I hope that we can actually grow a donor base at some point to be to help us grow and scale faster. But I think I just personally like as uh, like my parents are immigrants, like I didn't really have that network to be able to fall back on. And yeah, so I think, that was also kind of just being entrepreneurial and just working with what you have. But I think with COVID, it definitely helped us realize the value that is out there at this moment and the opportunities that are out there in terms of like what the education system's going through. I think there's also more need for career readiness types of opportunities, especially in a remote learning environment, in terms of developing those soft skills. Like I don't know how on earth you would develop soft skills like in this day and age when um, like it seems like every other week someone like a handful of people from school are getting sent home because someone was diagnosed from COVID. So for us, like we developed this curriculum for 21st century core skills, which includes a lot on soft skills. Basically anything you need to thrive within the workplace. So we have stuff on like empathy and compassion and problem solving, and resume building, and all these things that are important to some capacity. So we've been looking into getting money from grant funding that directly supports these types of initiatives. So I think it's a lot of just kind of seeing what is currently going on in the education market for us.
Yeah, it's like you just kind of opened my eyes to a different type of nonprofit fundraising, which is coming back again to the theme of value creation. Is you are looking at your nonprofit really as a business, and you're looking at now you've kind of the the pandemic has forced you to get even more specific and segmented with your audience, that like customers and buyers, and you've created an offering, and like it's not as much of a like we rely just on donations, but like no, like you can, like we're here to serve you, and this is our model, and you've made that work, which is really incredible, because I think traditionally, as someone new to the space, in my mind, it's like, oh, well, you're a nonprofit. That means you rely on donations and grants, and that's like your only source of revenue for your organization. But this kind of angle of providing a value added service that you're charging for, and you're delivering on, is really incredible. And I think the other part of that equation for Match Nice, and the way we're thinking about it, is similarly in the same way that, like I'm a first generation U.S. immigrant, and I'm like looking at the historical structures around fundraising for many nonprofits that I've talked to, and I think the status quo is that you have a very few handful of high net worth donors that are more or less bankrolling like a nonprofit's budget, and those nonprofits are semi-subservient to those donors and programming, and uh, whether that's a grant that you're relying on, like it's not a very diversified source of revenue coming for nonprofits, and we'd like to create a platform in a world where it's democratized, and like it's a community of hundreds and thousands of people chipping in like $10 or $100 every now and then, that like help sustain these missions. And I think coming back to your point around sustainability, it's like not just this one path solution. And I love that you prefaced all of that by saying that I think every nonprofit's a little different, and that is something I'm learning as well.
For sure. No, I really appreciate that. Every nonprofit really is so different. I think if you look at like their different like philanthropic breakdowns, some definitely have like over 50% from individual major gifts, while others are like major, have a major portion just from crowdfunding. So there's definitely, everyone has their different needs.
Well, Tiffany, this has been amazing. I think we're coming up a little bit on time here, so I wanted to ask a couple more questions. One is like, what do you want your legacy to be? Like, what is it that is really inspiring you to get up every day and to do what you're doing at Fulfill and beyond?
For sure. I honestly, I think I've been thinking about that more a lot nowadays, and also trying to figure that out. But I think for me, what brings me most joy that I'm finding is to be able to help people realize that they can make a difference. I think uh, that's just the most life-giving thing for me. With whatever it is that I'm up to, whether it's within Fulfill or something else, I think it's definitely it's like once you help someone realize the difference that they can make, it's hard for someone to unsee that. And, it only, if anything, encourages them to kind of pass that on to other people. And you're creating a whole impact movement. So I think that's something that definitely makes me get up every day because I think everyone has the potential to make a difference in their everyday lives, no matter how big or small it is.
Well, you answered my next question too, which was like if you had a message for the youth in the country, like what would it be? And I don't know that you could have put it any better. So, um, wow, I'm just like so inspired and grateful to have had this conversation with you and to be able to share it with the world. And you mentioned that you're starting your own podcast as well, or have started one.
Yeah, yeah. It's called Get Your Impact On. And so basically, Fulfill runs it, and it's basically me and uh, a woman named Naomi Israel, who's our head of content at Fulfill, and we're interviewing just people within the entrepreneurial or impact ecosystem uh, on specific sectors and concepts that align directly with our curriculum. So, for instance, we had episodes on like problem solving, user-centered design, um, the social entrepreneurial mindset. I think the next one that we want to have is on stakeholder mapping as well too. So kind of just going through every component of the business model and hopefully for other pathways as well.
Well, for our listeners out there, be sure to check out that podcast and also go to Fulfill. That's FULPHIL.org. A play on words from where the idea was born in Philadelphia. Yeah. Very good, Tiffany. It was so great to have you. So good to see you again. And can't wait to see what you do next. Keep up the amazing work.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.
Cheers. Welcome to episode 4 of the Nonprofit Lab, Madeline and Ibrahim. How's it going?
Pretty well. How are you?
Doing well. Digging the logos all around. Nice hat, nice art, nice little medallion I got here. Well, Tiffany Yau. Wow. Like she's another one of those guests that was so instrumental to helping inform the vision for our company from the very beginning. I think we talked about the story, and I think she didn't quite fully remember some parts of it. Like, Madeline, it makes me think of the first episode where I was like, remember when I asked you that question? You're like, no, I don't remember that. I was like, but like she helped me create this glimpse into the next generation of nonprofit leaders and what's on their mind. And so much of like what we've talked about in the last couple episodes came up from her own mouth, but I wanted to hear what you guys thought of the conversation.
Well, I'll say I'm not Gen Z, but when she and a lot of times I've heard throughout the podcast, there's just been moments where someone will say something and I'm like, yes, they just made something real that was floating around in my brain. But when she said that Gen Z has an entrepreneurial mind, I was like, that's so right. I mean, I just know from, knowing folks that are Gen Z, like you, Eve, you're constantly thinking of new ideas and ways to reinvent and different channels and things like that. I mean, it really was like a duh moment for me. And just awesome. I mean, what a cool attribute to have,
I'm actually a millennial.
No.
No, I'm kidding. I think the age ranges or the day ranges are
the hot topic.
the age ranges are very, very back and forth. Like some people say it's 96, some say it's 97, but I would say I definitely fall into the Gen Z category more so. I think it's been
Gen Z.
Yes. Yeah, I'm a Gen Z boomer. The way that I'd view it is every generation going back, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I viewed it as the further back you go, the less risk taking has gone on. Like if you think about it, the closer you've gotten to where we are today, the more often you see people taking crazy risks or just willing to take the risks necessary to take them to the next level or to take the next step that they want to take in their lives, their career, or whatever they're working on. Like I know too many people that are elderly, let's say 50 plus, that anytime they talk to me about like the stock market or like my career aspirations, they've always given me like safe advice. That tends to be the theme. It's like, oh yeah, if you get a job here, like you can work there until you're retired. And then they're saying like, yeah, I don't invest in the stock market. I only invest in bonds. I'm like, okay. Those are like probably the two safest things you could do like for your life. But at the same time, I think that us who are younger are more prone to risks because we view ourselves as having time. We refuse to limit ourselves to, okay, like I can do this for the next 45 years and then I'll be good. And then I can live the last, few years of my life doing okay. Or I can actually live my life how I want to live it, doing what I want to do, supporting the causes I want to support, being involved in what I want to be involved in. Regardless of whether there's a risk or not, I'm going to take it because worst case scenario, if you are confident in yourself and your abilities, there is no reason why you can't come out of that and do something else. The idea of failing is no longer a fear of this generation, I've found out. It's more so something you welcome. Because worst case scenario, you just discover, okay, this isn't for me, move on to the next thing, versus viewing it as something you're putting all your eggs in the basket for, and then worrying nonstop of like whether it's going to turn out well or not.
Wow. I mean, that reminds me a lot of what we were talking about in the last episode about the unconventional path, right? And how like it's exactly what you were saying, kind of like you take these steps, play it safe. And I think you're totally right. And this is kind of the theme of this episode with Tiffany is just wanting new ways of doing things and carving that path to make it happen. I mean, we're seeing it all over the place, especially with, everything with COVID just has accelerated that even more.
I think I agree with you on the risk trend over time and years. But I also want to just give a shout out to the greatest generation, right? Like I think risk has just looked different over the years, right? Like putting your life for freedom and the country and everything. I think, it's the lens at which we're looking at risk today, I think is afforded by the sacrifices that previous generations have made for us. I mean, Ibrahim, you and myself, we can just look one generation back and the sacrifices our parents made to get us to this beautiful country, for us to start this company together is, a good testament to that. But I agree with you on the fact that it is like like because of the luxuries we have in our lives, and we're not, many of us are not in a position of just wondering where we're going to get the next meal from, particularly if you're listening to this podcast, that, we have been given the privilege to take risk and to pursue bigger opportunities. So what do you guys think of, like, for me, this was like, there's a couple things that were really cool about Tiffany's nonprofit Fulphil for me, which was the fact that they've, it was really easy for them to, it seemed like, to kind of adopt this digital program focus. And I love the approach that they're taking in terms of like this train the trainer scalable model, right? Like they're exponentially building like the capacity to deliver through their model. And I think in this episode we talk a lot about what we've talked about in the first episode about like nonprofits are like businesses with a really big mission. What were you guys' thoughts on like that umbrella of everything I just said?
So I'd say this goes back to something that Tiffany said early in the podcast, and that she views the idea of focusing on giving attention to impact over the idea of just fundraisers. And then that kind of ties into what you were talking about, Puya, and then her point on how right now it's the time of the social entrepreneurs, the ones that are like driven towards impact and want to be tied towards impact and want some sort of influence that is being done for like the greater good, not necessarily for just a check. And then she brought in the idea of like social media influencers and like the current age and like what's available that we can use right now. But the idea of her like building that out, like Fulphil working on that, building that out, and then kind of being a hub for growth for these social entrepreneurs is essentially similar to like what an accelerator does to a startup. It's giving the resources needed to an individual to become what they want to be, given the guidance they need, and eventually just taking their own path. And then if you can, for lack of a better term, start pumping them out of that accelerator program, you're just providing the communities around the world, around the US, with people that are focused on doing exactly what Tiffany spoke about on the podcast. It's promoting impact, like making sure that goals and actions taken are driven towards the impact and towards the greater good. And those things definitely stuck out for me.
I'm like a fangirl of everything that she was talking about. I mean, the way that they, first of all, used feedback to structure that program is something obviously that we're doing at Match Nice too. So it was just great to kind of reaffirm that always is the best way to do things. But that structure of having people go through the program, first of all, train the trainer, working with teachers, having teachers deliver the message and the classes, and then having the students come back and create content. I mean, what an amazing way to keep your source material up to date, keep it really close to peers, right? I mean, Tiffany's young now, but as the company grows and she gets older, she has built this pipeline of people that can come in and continue staying relevant for the people that are taking the classes, which I think is just so cool. That was really awesome. And I wish more colleges and high schools kind of took that same model of making connections and kind of keeping people in the fold to just keep that cycle going. But for me, I was like, oh my gosh, I want to take all those classes. I think we should be taking those classes and, incorporating it into what we do at Match Nice too. Because I mean, what a great thing to teach. I think going back to the beginning of the conversation where I was saying like, having that observation or the takeaway that Gen Z is entrepreneurial. Well, I've never thought about ways to actually teach that, especially when everything is so digitized now. I think that's such a valuable thing, not only for kids in high school, but really for anybody.
Yeah, I want to catch something you said there. You said her company, and it's so like it's a nonprofit, but it is a company. Like it's a business.
It is, yes.
They're providing a service, and there's customers, and there's revenue, and I hope that one of the takeaways for our audience throughout this series is seeing that, right? Like seeing that connection and that cycle of like programming to supporting someone and that one individual then coming back into the program to feed the positive cycle of benefit in the community is, I think, a benchmark for most nonprofits. I know at Beat the Streets with Ben, that's like one of the biggest metrics that they look at is how many of their students come back to become mentors, or even some of like, I think the current mentoring director there was I think once a student of the program. So I love that they've created this cycle. And I think for us, what does that mean? Like one of the opportunities that comes to mind is we're hoping through Match Nice that we'll create the tools to coach nonprofits on how to speak to impact. And, how do we then take that one person or the handful of people that are getting, the formula down to then translate that to every volunteer that is part of the organization, and that it's not just like at the one annual fundraiser that there's this really nice kind of structure to speaking to the work that they're doing, but it's just a natural thing that comes to everyone.
That's a great idea. And I think it goes back to what we were talking about in the last episode about sharing best practices, right? I mean, even if it's within your own organization or within your community, just sharing what works for you is super powerful, and just putting it back into the cycle. I think we all got a really clear picture when Tiffany was talking about how they've set up this structure of kind of just bringing people back into the fold and having this kind of cycle. It's really awesome.
What else jumped out at you guys? Was there anything that like surprised you from that conversation, or something that like you were like, oh, I didn't know that?
This didn't necessarily surprise me, but it came back to, what I mentioned earlier about carving new paths, is when Tiffany was talking about not having access to capital just because of her network. She's like, I don't have that network to kind of access the kind of capital that is needed for bringing in tons of funds via fundraising, and why, it stressed how important it is to her to have financial sustainability in the organization that's not necessarily coming from fundraising. I thought that was really interesting because kind of two things stuck out for me with that. One was for someone who is obsessed with being efficient and not wasting time or effort, it must be infuriating for people in nonprofits, especially, but everywhere, but especially in nonprofits, to be spending so much time trying to either write grants or do whatever it is that you need to do to actually bring in funds, when really that the talent and the effort of your group and everyone working at your organization should be on programming and doing what you do best, making an impact. So that was one takeaway, and the other was just how darn, I've now lost it. Hold on, I had one other point to take. Oh, okay. I'll cut that part out. But the other
No,
part
wait,
was,
don't cut it out. Don't cut it out. We'll keep it real.
Keep it real. I lost my place. Well, the other part of it was just going back to the network side of things, which is just that the old way of doing the things is not the reality of. It has never really been the reality of the bigger scope and the bigger picture of the nonprofit space. There are limited amounts of people that have access to the networks and capital that it takes to really make a difference. And so what we're trying to do here with Match Nice is democratize that giving. So just hearing that people are thinking about carving new paths and finding new creative ways to get funding, that's what we want to be, and we're trying to be a part of.
Love that, Madeline. So well said, and such a big opportunity as well, right? And yeah, it's like a glimpse into the reality of that, because I think we're liable to potentially talk to more mature nonprofits or well-established nonprofits where that won't come up. But for those that are thinking about starting a nonprofit, I think this interview with Tiffany is a really good glimpse into the initial obstacles and questions that a new nonprofit leader has. And I love the conversation that we had about just how do you go from idea to execution. And for me, that was a huge moment of just respect and understanding that the process that we're going through as a public benefit corporation, a for-profit company with a mission, we believe in purpose and profit, isn't so different from what many nonprofits go through in going from an idea to piloting something and then executing. So was wondering if you guys had any thoughts or kind of reactions to just the that entrepreneurial process that she was describing as a nonprofit leader?
For me, it comes back to process. We've had a lot of conversations recently about scalability and customer success for our own company, but I think that it applies for any business. Is the more that you can set up systems that run on their own or allow people to be self-sufficient, and keep things running, whether it's on a fundraising end or operationally, you allow yourself so much more space for creativity, improving your product, like doing the stuff that is exciting and fun. So you kind of have to work on doing the boring stuff, so to allow yourself to really have tons of extra time to and resources to work on the fun stuff.
Well, were there any other kind of big takeaways or points that you guys wanted to discuss, or anything else that came up from that conversation?
I have two more. One was just kind of, I know I've said it on every episode, but Tiffany had a great way of phrasing this, which is just talking about mission and intention, and how they started one way at Fulphil and really made a big pivot. But talking about how if you have a really crystal clear mission, you know exactly what you're doing, you can, any pivot or decision that you make is justified, right? Because it's an easy decision to make when the mission is really clear. And the other thing that this really stressed for me was just how important it is for us as a company. We're getting close with nonprofits, but I think it's especially important for us to make sure that we're involving people who are deeply entrenched in working in the nonprofit space in our company. That's a goal that we're going to get to as the months and years go on. But I think it just reiterated, how important it is to have that really close connection to the nonprofit world.
Yeah, I love that point. Having your mission as the North Star, and like our mission has been the same from the inception of the company, and we've made a pretty big pivot to address fundraising, but the mission is still the same, and every decision that we're making is towards that path. And I think that this is one of the biggest, most interesting experiments as a public benefit corporation. Our stated public benefit statement, I believe, is to increase the flow of capital to nonprofits and for the benefit of nonprofits. And can we keep integrity for that as we grow to become a huge company, knock on wood, and support other companies, other nonprofits at scale? I think that's one of the things that I'm really excited about, is holding not just ourselves accountable to our mission, but also everyone who invests in our company. And maybe this is a funny, good little story where we had that one investor who did offer us our full pre-seed round, and like at the end, it turned out that the alignment and with our vision and mission wasn't exactly there, and it didn't happen. And we're all okay with that. And I think like having that be the barometer or the compass for decision making is so important for every nonprofit, and certainly for any business as well that has any level of clear mission for making an impact. All right, well, did you guys have any other points or questions for discussion before we wrap up today's debrief?
I think just that focusing on mission allows you to stop it just clears a lot of bottlenecks. It allows for innovation. When you're bringing together a great team, you're hiring people because you believe in them and their unique capabilities. So I think when you give people a mission to be their North Star, drive their decisions, you're allowing them to think of creative ways with their own perspective, their own experience, to solve problems for you. So I think that just staying true to that mission, I feel like sometimes people think that it's kind of a fluffy exercise to know what your mission is, but it really is one of those things that just like ripples out and makes you so much stronger and empowers everybody in the organization to really do amazing things.
And on that note, Malin and Ibrahim, thank you for being instrumental to our mission of connecting the nonprofit ecosystem and maximizing social impact. Thanks for joining.
Thanks, Tuya. See you next time.
Well, another episode down. Tiffany Yau. By the way, she's got a really great TEDx talk. You should check it out. And we'll have to post some additional resources about Tiffany. She's just a powerhouse social entrepreneur. Definitely give Fulphil a follow as well. As always, I'm going to end with a quote. This one comes from good old Abe Lincoln, who said, "The best way to predict the future is to create it." Have fun creating, and don't forget to follow us on your socials. Click like and subscribe. We'd love to have you tune in to our next episode. This has been another production of the Nonprofit Lab.